often we have parents who will write into us here on the show and say that they feel like a lot of times the experts that we have on the show tend to talk about kids that have had success and are a little bit further into the intervention, and they're always wanting to hear more about the kids who are more profoundly affected, or kids that maybe they've had some progress but they still have that one behavior that is extremely challenging, and that they're having some difficulties cracking that particular nut. So talk with us a little bit about extreme challenging behavior.
Well, when you mention that, two recent cases come to mind. The first is a child that we worked with in our early intervention program. He was very aggressive, particularly during instructional situations. And so we conducted what's called a functional analysis to identify why he was engaging in aggression. And it came out very clear that he engaged in aggression during demand situations and that he was motivated to escape from those demands. And so we had an intervention in place to address that function, yet months later, he was still engaging in aggression. And we went through every function-based intervention for escape, maintain behavior, which is what he had, that I could think of. And, it had been so long since I recommended the use of a punishment procedure, because function-based interventions that are based on extinction and differential reinforcement are generally very effective, particularly if the function is very clear. And we conducted his functional analysis, I think, 3 or 4 times, because I couldn't understand why we weren't getting a treatment effect. Mm-hmm. And it may have been because outside of our program, people were still reinforcing the behavior. But nonetheless, I thought he should be able to learn the discrimination that when he's with us, problem behavior is not reinforced. And we had a lot of preventative measures in, and we still were not getting a treatment effect. And it's funny, I'm often associated with punishment because of some of the research I've done, but I believe almost an entire year had gone by and I still had not even considered punishment for him. The very first punishment procedure that we evaluated was effective, highly effective, to the point where he went from engaging consistently in high rates of aggression every day to 0 across multiple weeks. And what we were doing was what's called a basket hold. So it was brief restraint. It was only 30 seconds long. And I really wasn't optimistic it would be effective, because during that 30 seconds, he clearly was going to be getting an escape from demands, because we were holding his arms down. But he didn't like that. And it was extremely effective. And like I said, he went for several months and didn't have a single instance of aggression. But the problem was, in his school district, they were not allowed to use contingent restraint.
Wow.
So we could not use that in his school. So he ended up having to be discharged from our program because of, the amount of services are limited. It's state funded, and we had to come up with the best we could for his classroom, but we never were able to get that type of effect without that intervention. And to me, it seemed like 30 seconds of holding his arms down to get 0 levels of aggression they should have found some way to prove that. But
right. Heart-wrenching, and I'm glad that you bring this up, because of course, I love the fact that punishment is the thing of last resort. We were just talking earlier today about the fact that most of us were raised in a very punishment-driven society. Not everybody in their home had this, but most of us as parents have been taught, well, you need to teach them a lesson and they need to be punished, and if somebody does something, they have to be punished. And then we come to ABA and we're learning that, it's usually much more effective to do everything but punishment, but it's important to realize that sometimes after you've exhausted everything else, the punishment is something that, but I especially love that you told us what it was, 30 seconds of a basket hold, which no one would do unless they were trained appropriately to do a basket
Mhm.
hold. We want to make sure that parents know that this isn't something you just try, you need to be trained in it. But I'm sorry to hear that you weren't able to completely follow through because of the school. That's got to be
Yeah.
frustrating for you as a provider.
I was very disappointed. I thought that, and we were going to provide all the support and training that was needed. And I really thought that they were going to make an exception. Some of the people in the district really wanted to. We brought our data, we demonstrated it. We really thought that they were going to approve it. But in the end, they said that they just couldn't because of the state laws,
Yeah.
and that in their district, in that particular district, there was just a blanket. It could be done in an emergency situation, but not as a programmed consequence for problem behavior.
Wow. But is it safe to say for our parents who are watching who are dealing with some extreme challenging behavior, is it a lot of times we have ABA experts who come on the show and talk about how there's always progress to be had, and that when something isn't working, that it just is a matter of keep, as you just said, working and working and working until you find what does work. Is it too much to say to give these families hope that challenging behaviors in almost all cases can be reduced?
Well, I think that if the behavior is severe enough to warrant trying some of the more intrusive interventions, then you probably could get close to 100% success rate. But, I think that there are some behaviors that perhaps it doesn't seem warranted to try some of those more intrusive procedures, and not necessarily because those procedures will hurt the child, but it's more of people don't want to use them,
Yeah.
and so they won't.
Yeah.
And so, but I've certainly worked with people, kids, adults, for whom I was not able to come up with an effective treatment.
But do you feel like that you have a substantial amount of success though in treating extreme challenging behavior?
Oh, yeah. I mean, usually, if you can get a clear function, if you can get a clear idea of the function, then the success rate is going to be in the 90s,
Okay.
90% higher, um, because function-based treatments, if they're implemented consistently and correctly by everybody in the child's life, are highly effective. So there's just going to be that percentage, though, for whom either you can't identify the function, or the function is not related to the behaviors of other people, meaning that what's maintaining the behavior is something inherent in the behavior
Yeah.
itself. We call it automatic reinforcement. The behavior produces its own sensory consequences that keep that behavior going. And so there are some cases of very severe self-injury, like head banging, that sometimes look like that the person, it doesn't matter if anyone's interacting with the person or if they're just in a room by themselves for hours, that behavior will persist.